and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Trade tensions between the United States and China are flaring up again, as Trump announced that his administration is considering cutting cooking oil-related business ties with China as part of potential retaliation for Beijing's refusal to buy American soybeans. The International Monetary Fund raised its growth outlook for South Korea and the global economy, but still warned of uncertainties from tariff risks and rising tensions between Washington and Beijing. South Korea plans to send a joint governmental response team to Cambodia today, following the recent death of a Korean college student who was tortured by an organized crime gang. Around 80 more Koreans in Cambodia remain missing, or their safety has yet to be confirmed. We begin this morning with escalating trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. U.S. President Donald Trump now says his administration is considering cutting cooking oil-related trade ties with China as part of Washington's retaliation for Beijing's refusal to buy American soybeans. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
Tensions between the United States and China are flaring up again, this time over soybeans and cooking oil. U.S. President Donald Trump announced Tuesday that his administration is considering cutting cooking oil-related business ties with China as part of potential retaliation for Beijing's refusal to buy American soybeans. He described China's move as an economically hostile act and indicated that the U.S. could easily produce cooking oil domestically, making imports unnecessary. China has long been the biggest buyer of U.S. soybeans, purchasing around 27 million metric tons worth nearly $12.8 billion in 2024. But since May, Beijing has not bought a single soybean from the United States, marking a sharp break that comes amid a broader trade standoff. Later at the White House, Trump addressed the U.S.-China relationship more broadly. He said Washington must be cautious in its dealings with Beijing, noting that while the relationship with Chinese leadership remains stable overall, China has a tendency to push boundaries, and the U.S. will not allow itself to be taken advantage of. Meanwhile, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer said the timing of the additional 100% tariffs on Chinese exports, set to take effect by November 1st or earlier, will ultimately depend on Beijing's actions. He explained that officials from both sides met for staff-level talks in Washington this week, and that there's still a possibility of working through disagreements, particularly over China's restrictions on critical minerals. Greer emphasized that the U.S. will not accept a system where China tries to control global high-tech supply chains. With soybeans, cooking oil, and critical minerals all on the table, both Washington and Beijing are under pressure to find a way to ease tensions before the next round of tariffs hits next month. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And amid rising tensions, China has announced sanctions targeting 5 U.S. subsidiaries of South Korean shipbuilder Hanwha Ocean, accusing them of cooperating with American efforts to impose punitive measures on Chinese vessels. The move bans Chinese organizations and individuals from conducting business with the subsidiaries and comes amid rising tensions in global shipping and shipbuilding, including new port fees imposed by both the U.S. and China. In response, South Korea's presidential office said on Tuesday that it's communicating and responding through Korea-China trade channels, and that the immediate impact appears limited, while the effect on U.S.-Korea shipbuilding cooperation will be assessed comprehensively. And Finance Minister Koo has departed for the United States to attend the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meetings. He will be in Washington, D.C. from October 15th to 18th, taking part in a series of economic discussions. Koo is also considering coordinating a separate meeting with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. If the meeting is held, the two are expected to discuss potential measures, including an unlimited currency swap and broader Korea-U.S. trade cooperation. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund has raised South Korea's growth outlook, but warns that escalating trade tariff tensions and global uncertainties could slow the recovery. Our Moon has the details.
The International Monetary Fund has raised its forecast for South Korea's economic growth amid pressure on Seoul to wrap up trade negotiations in Washington. In its latest economic outlook, the IMF now expects the economy to grow by 0.9% in 2025, 0.1 percentage points higher than its July projection. This is in line with forecasts from domestic institutions such as the Bank of Korea, but lower than that of the OECD's. South Korea's forecast for 2026 was maintained at 1.8%, with the country's finance ministry stating that this projection is interpreted to mean that economic growth will return to its normal trajectory next year. The IMF, however, warns that escalating tariff conflicts could hurt South Korea's export-driven sectors, particularly automobiles, and weigh on overall growth if trade tensions intensify again. Globally, the IMF raised its growth outlook to 3.2% for this year, up 0.2 percentage points from July, citing stronger than expected resilience in major economies. The U.S. economy is now projected to grow by 2% this year and 2.1% next year, while China's growth is expected to slow from 4.8% to 4.2%. The financial institution said the impact of U.S. tariff policies was smaller than initially feared, thanks to preemptive supply chain adjustments and new trade arrangements. But it cautioned that rising tensions between Washington and Beijing could once again weigh heavily on global growth.
This is more of a downside risk in a sense. This is what we have to think about what could happen if negative trade measures were implemented, if some restrictions on exports of critical materials were implemented. It illustrates the potential for the global economy to take a turn for the worse if trade tensions become more elevated.
It also pointed to the ongoing AI investment boom as a potential source of instability, warning that if the bubble bursts, it could echo the shock of the internet stock bubble bust of the early 2000s. 문혜련, Arirang News.
So trade tensions between the United States and China have been escalating, and although Washington is trying to ease tensions, it appears to be affecting the global economy as well as Korea's local currency. For more on this, we're joined today by Shin Myung-gyu, Associate Professor of Economics at Yonsei University. Professor Shim, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So the IMF now warns that the global economy is showing signs of strain amid tariff risks and trade tensions, and it also expected the Korean economy to grow by 0.8%. What's your take on this?
Yeah, overall, the new IMF estimate is slightly adjusted upward, which is basically almost identical to the previous one, which makes sense to me. In particular, the expected growth rate on the Korean economy has slightly increased by only about 0.1 percentage point higher than before. I basically agree with the warning that the uncertainty about tariff and trade can drag down the global economy. We even observed for the last several days that the U.S. president changed his stand towards the trade tension with China, which further escalated trade uncertainty, which it has stayed at the historically high level since the early 2025. And also the heightened policy uncertainty in the U.S. with the government shutdown and political pressure on the Fed can be another factor that seems to be a downside risk ahead of the global economy. In terms of Korea, which is a small open economy that really relies on the state of the global economy, I also agree with the IMF that the growth rate would not be higher than 1%, given all the constraints such as tariff uncertainty and the political uncertainty that it faces.
Right, and because of that trade tension, the Korean won is at its weakest level against the dollar in around 5 months. Are trade tensions between the U.S. and China the main reason behind this, and do you expect this trend to continue?
Yes, I expect that such a trend with low-valued Korean won would be somewhat continued for a while. First of all, uncertainty about the trade and the policy does not seem to become lower very soon. I, together with my co-author, found that when there is an increase in uncertainty, regardless of the uncertainty measure that is used for the analysis, tends to lower the value of Korean won. And given that the Korean economy faces different types of heightened uncertainty, I guess the rally would continue. Second, the uncertain state of the trade tariff conversation with the US seems to continue so that it can make the investors to worry about the Korean economy. Because the Korean economy, as I pointed out earlier, heavily depends on the trade, losing the competitiveness in the US market due to higher tariff rate makes people to lower their expectations on the future path of the Korean economy, and this makes the Korean won to be less attractive. However, I would like to point out that the low Korean won would be a kind of good news for the exporting firms because it lowers the price of the goods that is exported from Korea. So it might cancel out, at least partially, the negative effect of higher tariff.
I see. And there's also uncertainty surrounding the trade negotiations between Seoul and Washington, as they've yet to reach an agreement on tariffs. The Korean government says Washington, has presented a new alternative proposal regarding the $350 billion investment fund. How do you think the South Korea-U.S. tariff negotiations will play out?
Why I really hope the trade deal to be made very soon, but I'm not so sure if it can close very soon. This is because the US government does not keep its consistency when finishing the trade deals with other countries. And this problem does not seem to apply to Korea alone. We see the same situation constantly pops up between the trade deal with the US, between the US and Japan, EU and China. I particularly think that the government needs to smartly argue that the Korean government should consider the usual Koreans' opinions seriously because the recent events from the US, such as deportation of the Korean workers, put pressures on the Korean government not to yield too much during the trade deals.
I see. And Professor Shin, before I let you go, Samsung Electronics posted its biggest profit in 3 years yesterday, with third quarter operating profit exceeding market expectations, and it was actually up more than 30% compared to the year before. What's behind this, and will the booming trend in semiconductor industry continue for the time being?
The most important factor behind such good news for Samsung Electronics seems to be the DS part. Its operation profit was 0.7 billion won, which increased by about 17 times from the previous quarter, which is really a huge change. And this is driven by the increased demand for the memory chips thanks to the AI booms. And another important factor was its success in selling the new smartphone, which enables Samsung Electronics to earn about 0.3 billion won from the smartphone production part alone. And the state of the market seems to be also favorable for Samsung Electronics, at least for a while, because the market for DRAM memory chip is expected to expand more in the upcoming quarter, according to the market research firm.
That's good to hear. All right, Professor Shim, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
As the Korean government continues to step up efforts to tackle crimes targeting Koreans in Cambodia, President Lee Jae-myung called for tighter travel restrictions and swift coordination with the local authorities there. The country now plans to send a joint governmental response team to Cambodia today. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
With growing calls to tackle a recent crime surge in Cambodia targeting Koreans, President Lee Jae-myung began the weekly cabinet meeting by urging the prompt return of kidnapped Koreans who had been caught up in job scams.
국민의 생명과 안전을 지키는 것이 정부의 가장 큰 책임입니다. 지금은 다른 무엇보다 피해자들을 보호하고 또 사건 연루자들을 국내로 신속하게 송환해야 됩니다.
He called for the need to speed up establishing a coordination system with the Cambodian authorities, strengthening travel restrictions for areas of concern, and securing a sufficient budget for consular services.
가용 자원을 총동원해서 신속하게, 정확하게, 확실하게 대응해 주시기 바랍니다.
This follows an increase in reported kidnappings of Koreans by criminal rings in Cambodia through job scams, often related to voice phishing, and the recent torture death of a Korean college student by a local organized crime gang.
The second Vice Foreign Minister will lead a joint governmental response team and will be sent to Cambodia on the 15th. Also, an international cooperative body will be launched to carry out a joint police operation on the kidnapping and confinement of our people.
On the economy, President Lee urged that all hands should be on deck in the face of intensifying global trade conflict, stressing the need for gaining a technological edge and diversifying export markets. He also called for strict measures to straighten out distortions in the domestic real estate market caused by disinformation. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now shifting gears to sports, the South Korean men's national football team bounced back from a heavy defeat to Brazil with a 2-0 win over Paraguay in a friendly in Seoul on Tuesday. In the match at the Seoul World Cup Stadium, Ji-sung opened the scoring after 15 minutes, marking his first international start with a goal. Substitute Oh Hyun-gyu sealed the victory in the 75th minute with his fourth goal in 6 international contests. The win came just days after a 5-0 loss to Brazil. Head coach Hong Myung-bo responded by shaking up his lineup, making 8 changes to the starting 11.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. Israel has received 4 more hostage bodies from Gaza, part of the ongoing exchange under a U.S.-brokered ceasefire with Hamas. The coffins, escorted by troops, were taken to the National Institute for Forensic Medicine for identification. Officials say families have been notified and vow effort, quote, will not stop until every hostage is home. In Jerusalem, President Donald Trump addressed Israel's parliament, where he warned Hamas to disarm or be disarmed. Meanwhile, the Red Cross confirmed 45 Palestinian bodies from handed over in Khan Yunis, many still unidentified. Now to Madagascar, where the military says it has taken control of the country and dissolved key government institutions after the president fled amid weeks of protests. The announcement came after minutes after lawmakers voted to impeach the president, who had gone into hiding following mass demonstrations over poverty and corruption. Cheering crowds filled the streets of the capital as soldiers declared they would lead a 2-year transition, draft a new constitution, and then hold elections. The presidency described the move as a coup d'etat and insisted that the elected government remains legitimate. Regional observers urge calm as the country faces its deepest political crisis in a decade. According to UN reports, there have been more than 20 deaths since the unrest in Madagascar began last month. In the U.S., Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has said the country's economy is on a somewhat firmer trajectory than expected, even as hiring and firing remain at historic lows. Speaking in Philadelphia on Tuesday, Powell noted policymakers will take a meeting-by-meeting approach to future rate cuts as they weigh persistent inflation against a weakening labor market. Powell said private data suggests that both layoffs and hiring remain low, even with official figures delayed by the ongoing government shutdown. He added that the uptick in inflation mainly reflects tariffs rather than broader price pressures. The central bank cut rates by a quarter point last month and is widely expected to do so again at its next meeting in 2 weeks. R&B and soul singer D'Angelo has died from cancer aged 51, his family confirmed. Born Michael Eugene Archer in Richmond, Virginia, D'Angelo was celebrated for pioneering neo-soul, blending R&B, jazz, and hip-hop. His 3 albums, Brown Sugar, Voodoo, and Black Messiah, won 4 Grammys and reshaped modern soul music. The video for his hit titled How Does It Feel became a defining moment of his career. Tributes from artists poured in, including Doja Cat, who praised him as a, quote, true voice of soul, and Jennifer Hudson, who said, quote, we lost a true original today.
Get ready for more wet weather as precipitation will gradually spread across most of the country starting this afternoon. Rain that started over the eastern part of Gangwon-do, Jeollanam-do, and Jeju this morning is expanding to southern regions this afternoon, and by tonight they will reach the Seoul metropolitan area. And until tomorrow, east of Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces could see up to 60 millimeters of showers. The capital area could get 10 to 40 millimeters. Meanwhile, a short burst of heavy rain about 20 millimeters per hour could pound down in southern parts of Korea. And this afternoon, daily highs will be 2 to 5 degrees higher than yesterday, getting up to 23 degrees Celsius here in the capital and Daegu. Busan will be topping out at 25 degrees. Now, the good news is that this frequent nationwide rain is finally expected to clear out by Saturday morning, bringing back brighter skies. However, be prepared for a major shift on Sunday as temperatures will take us to late autumn weather.
Now that is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.